Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever and however you are listening or watching the Valley Life podcast, where we're taking theology from the classroom to the living room, storeroom, stockroom, showroom, workroom, weight room, and water closet, and to the Constitutional Convention.
Wow.
Hey, buddy.
Hello.
This is Brandon Lockridge with me. I'm Vinnie, lead pastor at Valley Life Community Church. We're trying to take good theology and bring it out to the people. We believe bad theology hurts people, so we're putting time, effort, and intentionality into bringing good theology out there through this podcast. And we want you to have some of it. So drink up, eat up, listen up, get all up in it.
Get all up in it.
All up in it. Suit up.
Yep. We're trying to be like Ligonier, only a little dumber.
Welcome to the Valley Life podcast. Just a
Yes.
little dumber than Legionnaire.
Just a little bit.
Thanks, buddy. We're in our series called Pastor Vinnie Asks a Question, where we're utilizing some Legionnaire resources from the late, great Dr. R.C. Sproul. He wrote a text, or I should say compiled a text called Now That's a Good Question, where he used, I think it's a combination of his pastoral ministry and radio ministry, where he would take questions and just, spit good theology at people in response. And so super practical text. Would highly recommend it. There'll be a link in the show notes to order a copy of it. But a great, great encyclopedia of pastoral wisdom and practical Christian living for any bookshelf. I actually bought this before I was a pastor, and so I've had this book a long time, and it's been super helpful. So we're using that text to walk through a couple different subjects. I mentioned the Constitutional Convention because our subject this week is government. And I've got a question about government. Hey, Brandon.
Yes, Pastor Vinny.
Are there certain ethical standards that the government should uphold on a biblical basis?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit in the last episode, but the answer is yes. Yes, there are. So
exciting. What are they?
Yeah, well, let's go to Romans 13 because this is kind of where we're getting a lot of our material here. Is from Romans 13 because it speaks to these things. Last episode, we mentioned that we as Christians do have a responsibility to the government to submit ourselves to the governing authorities. We got that right from verse 1 in Romans 13. We talked about how that they are there because God has placed them there. Right? And if you go a little bit further down in Romans 13, so for example, starting verse 3 here, it says, "For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he," this is the ruler, "is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he's the servant of God, an avenger, who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." And so the idea here is that the governing authorities do have a responsibility to clear the way of wrongdoing so that good can flourish. Right? There is a responsibility to punish evil, to punish wickedness, and by doing that, they allow and make space for goodness, for godliness to flourish. And so, does that always happen? Is the state always going to do that rightly? No. I mean, I think you could, again, we talked about last episode. Paul was writing this, and the Roman Empire was in authority at this time. The Roman Empire was incredibly wicked. I mean, we think we see wickedness today, and we do. But I mean, the Roman Empire was. I mean, if you go back historically and you read about the Roman Empire at this point, they were terrible. And yet, Paul is still writing this, right? He's saying, "Look you still have a responsibility to submit to them. They have a responsibility to punish wickedness and allow good to flourish." That's not always going to happen, but the responsibility is still there, right?
I think it's important. We talked a little bit about this last episode too. If we understand that all authority has been instituted by God, then ultimately we can kind of trace that authority ladder upward till we get to God. So again, if we go back, God has instituted, the family that contains levels of authority between children and parents. We have the church, we have this, and then the state as an act. And in each one of those authorities, the state, the church, or parental authorities, the idea is to discipline that which is evil and wicked so that good might flourish.
Right.
Well, because we trace the ladder up toward God as the highest authority, that means each one of those subsequent lower authorities becomes accountable to God.
Yep.
So
exactly.
Should a government, like you said, fail in its duties, or let's say inverts what is good and evil, right?
Yep.
So if a government begins to call something that is clearly evil according to the Word of God good,
Yep.
or call something that is good according to the Word of God evil, then they're accountable to God who establishes those terms.
Yep.
And so we can trust that even if we have to subject ourselves to a government that is inverting the terms of good and evil, and may not be able to hold them accountable in a free and democratic way like we get to do in America through elections, there will be a day in which that government or that authority figure will have to give an account for what they did with the authority God entrusted to them.
Yep. This is actually, Dr. Sproul says basically the same thing. I just want to read some of what he says because I think it's so good. He says, the state as much as the church is under the authority of God, and every earthly authority at some point will be held accountable by God for how they exercise that authority. No government, no state government, no earthly government ever has the right or the authority to rule by their own preferences without being held accountable to some ultimate standard of righteousness and justice. And skipping down a little bit, he says, obviously states can become corrupt, and states may violate the standard of God's righteousness and those standards of justice that are rooted ultimately in the character of God himself. When they do that, they will be held accountable by God. And I think that's a really important point, because the thing is, we can get frustrated when we don't see justice happen right now.
Oh, totally.
Right? We can go, something evil happens, something wicked happens, somebody in some place of power does something wicked and evil, and we want that justice, we want that retribution right now,
immediately.
Yeah. And that's the way it is. I think certainly people we as Christians can struggle with that, but even non-Christians, that's a huge struggle, because for them, this is the only place on earth is the only place where there will be justice, right? From their perspective.
Right.
But I think that's the comforting thing as Christians. We can know that nothing gets past God's eye, right? I mean, if they continue in wickedness their entire life, it's God's going to have retribution. There will be judgment. They will be held accountable for how they governed, how they ruled.
Yeah. The scale that tips toward injustice on earth will be set to equilibrium in eternity. There will be an answer for all those human beings, period, who act in an unjust way outside of Christ. And in particular for those governments. I mean, we can just think of the most recent headlines across the globe. Those countries that invade others out of greed or a desire for power and domination of other people groups. For those that bring terror or use their authority to punish or bring into subservice their citizens. And oppress them in wickedness, they will answer to God for that position and the posture that they took in wickedness. And that, again, does not bring immediate physical relief from the torment of a wicked government. It does bring an internal peace to the soul to know that the injustice I'm experiencing is seen, it is known, and there is a righteous judge that I can appeal to in the Creator God, who reveals himself in the person and work of Jesus Christ. I think of Psalm 2, I think, is a helpful passage here.
Yep, and he mentions that as well. And I was just going to finish off with that, because there's a little bit of comedy in here, but
Fire
he
away.
says, we remember in Psalm 2 that the psalmist's complaint was that the rulers of the world were taking counsel against God, saying, let us cast God's cords from us, and let us cast his ropes asunder. That is, the rulers of the pagan nations were declaring their independence from God. The answer to the psalmist was, of course, that he who sits in the heavens shall laugh, but only for a moment. Then he will call them into account because God judges all other judges. And, if anyone, we take comfort in knowing that nobody is getting away with anything. Nobody is acting independently and thinking that they're thwarting God's plan.
Right.
Right. And when they do, we're told that God laughs, right? He laughs at them. Like, this is the sovereign creator of the universe. Like, nothing gets past him. Right.
So just quick to summarize as we close, what are the ethical standards that a government must be held to? And pretty clearly, the primary overarching is to create an environment that fosters good so that it can flourish. And one of the means by which it does that is through the discipline or punishment or exercise of judgment against wickedness. Should a government begin to fail in one of in that primary duty or that secondary means, there will be a day in which they will have to answer to God, who will always create an environment in which good can flourish and will always punish wickedness.
Master of summarization. That's just you.
That's me, all over. Anyway.
All over. Yep.
Hey, if this has been encouragement to you, would you do us a favor? Would you like? Would you share? Would you subscribe? Would you tell a friend? Let them know that the Valley Life Podcast is a place they can go for good theology. And maybe even leave us a review.
That would be helpful.
Please be kind. You can email critiques, info@vlcciddaho.org, and leave a good review. Save the critiques for email.
Yeah, indeed.
Those are easier to delete. Anyway, for Mr. Brandon Lockridge, I'm Pastor Vinnie. As always, dear listener and watcher, God bless you.